All right, Rabbi, good morning. Good morning. Let's begin. Begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning share. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsor for the year 5785 Tafshin Pehei, the Tilson family from Eretz Yisrael, for dedicating all the Sherman Drushos this month as a Zechus for the Besaros Tovos for Am Yisrael. Our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Tishrei, Dr. Linda Weinberg, in loving memory of her husband, Dr. Paul Weinberg Peretz, Moshe Ben Avram David, and Avram and Shane D. Kelman, in memory of their parents, Jerome and Bernice Kelman, and Alexander and Frederica David. Our week of learning sponsors, Jonathan and Alana Austin of Eretz Yisrael, as a token of Hakar Satov to Jonathan's brother Avi Tobias for introducing him to the Shir. May HaKadosh Baruch Hu continue to give all of us the incredible Siyata D'Shmaya and strength to continue our journey towards finishing Shas. Our week of learning sponsors, Greg and Rachel Levitan, in commemoration of the yahrzeit of Greg's mother, Esther Levitan, Esther Bas Herschel. Our Daf Yomi sponsors for today, Hashem David and Roberta Schwartz, in memory of David, Danny, and Lila Schwartz. In honor of David, what's the dedication? In memory of David, Danny, and Lila Schwartz's in memory of David, Danny, and Lila Schwartz's mother, Tavia Hutel Bas Aryeh Lev, Zichron Levracha. May her kindness, warmth, selflessness, and knowledge be for a blessing. Beautiful. And Menashe and Bracha Ephron, in honor of the celebration and rebuilding of the Jewish people with the birth of a baby boy, Matzah Yom Kippur in Yerushalayim, to Yaakov and Levi Frager, grandparents Menashe and Bracha Ephron, and Yehuda and Tzipora Frager. Mazel Tov, and an anonymous sponsorship today in honor of Yoni Frager's 41st birthday. Mazel Tov. All right, he's back. The birthday celebration is back. And also, we dedicate our learning. We all followed with a broken heart with the attack yesterday on the Golani base in Binyamina that resulted in the loss of 4 soldiers: Sergeant Omri Tamari, Sergeant Yosef Haib, Sergeant Yoav Agmon, and Sergeant Amitai Alon. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, their precious neshamas will have an aliyah. Kadosh Baruch Hu will continue to look after all of our soldiers, to heal all of the wounded, and in merit Hashem to bring back our hostages b'shalom and b'karav. I will say with that, let us begin. We have a lot to do today. Baruch Hashem, today's daf is Kuf Yud Aleph 111. We are picking up on Kuf Yud Amud Beis 110b. We left off literally last line. Va'ish es imo. So I will say, so continuing along in Eretz Hashem in our discussions regarding inheritance. So some really fascinating Gemaras today. Now I know everyone is eagerly awaiting that day when we finally get to the comprehensive and complete list. We're getting there every day a little bit closer. Eretz Hashem will take us a little bit longer, but once we get there, Eretz Hashem will appreciate the journey that we have taken. So let us begin. So Ha'ish es imos. Remember again, the Mishnah said, so now we're really up to category 2. In category 2, this is the list of people who inherit but don't bequeath. So for example, a son inherits his mother, right? The son inherits his mother, but doesn't bequeath to his mother. So the Gemara says, from where do we know this? Where do we know this? So the very interesting Gemara here. The Tan Rabbanon, the pasuk says as follows: top of Kuf Yud Aleph 111a. V'cholbas yoreshes nachalo mimatos b'nei Yisrael. So the pasuk says, any daughter who inherits, now the lashon of the pasuk is very important, who inherits property, mimatos. Now, amata literally means a staff. In this context, it means a tribe. So any woman who inherits property from the tribes of Israel. Now, this the context over here is Benos Tzlavchad, right? So remember again, we had this in yesterday's daf, the daughters of Tzlavchad, so they inherit. But part of what happened after they inherited was that they were supposed to marry into their tribe, to marry within their tribe. This way, the property would not switch tribal affiliations. Now, that's an interesting halacha in and of itself. Is that a halacha? Is it a rule? What is it? Was it a suggestion? If it's a rule, is it binding, for all eternity, or just that? Again, we'll see all of that in Meretz Hashem hopefully over the course of today. Point over here is the pasuk says, So the Gemara says, so take a look at the Rashbam for just a moment. V'chobas yoreshes nachla matos seifa dikra le'echa mimishpachas mata avia tia liisha kedei shlo tisof nachla mimata lamata. So the pasuk says, if a woman inherits property, she should not marry into another tribe, lest she go ahead and transfer the property from the tribe of its origin to another tribe. Umiu lo nag ela ba'osadar. All right, so the Rashbam says it over here already. He says this halacha that if a woman inherited property, she has to marry within her tribe, only applied to that generation. Now, what's that generation? The generation that went into Eretz Yisrael and divided up the land, right? The division generation. We'll see this a little bit later on. We'll come on fresh in 5. Let's go back to the Gemara. So the Gemara says, "Hey bas yoreshes shnei matos." Now, here's what's interesting. Now, if you look at lashon of the pasuk is the chobas yoreshes nachala mimatos b'nei Yisrael. So, what does this sound like? This sounds like a woman is inheriting property from where? 2 tribes. Because matos is plural. So how could a woman, but what's the case where a woman is inheriting property from 2 different tribes? Ella, this is very interesting. Elazu shavia mishevet echad v'ima mishevet acher umesu virashtan. So now watch this. It's very simple. How did it happen? So you have a girl, you have a woman, and her parents are from 2 different tribes, and both from her mother's side and her father's side, she is the sole inheritor. She's the sole inheritor, and therefore, again, technically speaking, this girl inherits 2 different buckets of tribal property. So the Gemara says, or two different parcels from 2 different tribes. So the Gemara says, and therefore, again, ve'inli ela bas. So this is interesting. So just understand what's happening over here, right? What are we trying to do? We're trying to figure out what is the source that a son inherits his mother. So now the Gemara quotes a pasuk that indicates that a daughter inherits her mother. Now, how do we know that a daughter inherits her mother? Because the pasuk just said if you have a woman who inherits 2 different pieces of property from 2 different tribes, how could a woman inherit 2 different pieces of property from 2 different tribes? She's the sole inheritor for her mother and her father. So you've just established that a daughter could inherit her mother. Okay? Ve'inli alabas. I now know that a daughter can inherit her mother. Ben minayin, how do I know that a son inherits his mother? To which the Gemara says, Amrit Kavachomer. It's a Kavachomer. What is a Kavachomer? Uma bas shahora kocha b'nichsea av, yafe kocha b'nichsea aim. So we'll say a daughter who has we'll call it a lower inheriting position when it comes to her father's property, right? Well, why does she have a lower inheritance position? Because if there's a son, right, the son comes first. So if when it comes to the property of a father, so a daughter only inherits after a son, so therefore again, ben shiyafa kocha b'nichsea av, so certainly then a son who is a first position inheritor, when it comes to his father, should certainly be an inheritor when it comes to his mother as well. That's the Kavachomer, right? So again, one more time, if a girl has a lower position in inheritance when it comes to the property of her father, but yet again, she's still aligned for inheriting her father. So therefore, again, a son who's a first position inheritor by his father must certainly have an inheritance position by his mother. Okay, that's the svara. That's the svara. So we've just established through a Kavachomer that halacha l'maisa, a son inherits his mother. So the Gemara says, so 1 second, let's take that a little bit further. Let's say as follows: Mala halon ben kodim lebas, afkan ben kodim lebas. So we should say that. Therefore, let's take the Kavachomer a little bit further. Therefore, just as by the father, the son has an inheritance position in front of his sister, in front of the daughter by a father, so too by the mother, we should say a son inherits before a daughter. In other words, just take the Kavachomer the whole way. To which the Gemara says, no. To which the Gemara says, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yossi, Amru Mishum Rabbi Zechariah ben Akatzov, Echad haben ve'echad habas, Shavin b'nichsea av. Did I skip? No, good. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yossi, Amru Mishum Rabbi Zechariah ben Akatzov, Echad haben ve'echad habas, Shavin b'nichsea aim. So we'll say, so now we have this position of Rabbi Zechariah ben Akatzov that is quoted that the concept of a son being a first position inheritor only applies to the property of the father. When it comes to the property of the mother, all children are equal. So I will say, so now essentially what we've established is as follows. On the basis of we're trying to figure out, how do I know that a son inherits his mother, right? The Mishnah tells me that a son inherits from his mother, doesn't bequeath to his mother. How do I know that a son inherits his mother? The pasuk says that if a girl inherits 2 pieces of tribal property from 2 different tribes, how could a girl inherit 2 pieces of tribal property? She's a sole inheritor for her mother and her father. So I've just established that a daughter inherits her mother. Now I'm kavachomer. What's the kavachomer? If a son, right? If a daughter who has a lower position of inheritance by the father, yet nevertheless inherits his father, it inherits her mother. So to a son who is a first position inheritor by his father, certainly inherits his mother. So take the kavachomer a little bit further and say that what? That just as a son is a first position inheritor by his father, so too he should be a first position inheritor ultimately again by his mother. So to that, Rabbi Zechariah ben Akatzav says no. The concept of son having precedence is only a din in paternal inheritance, but not by maternal inheritance. When it comes to inheriting a mother, sons and daughters inherit equally. Okay, so that is the position of Rabbi Zechariah ben Akatzav. Fine. So the Gemara says, my timer. Now, what's Rabbi Zechariah ben Akatzav's logic for that? Why? In other words, why is that? After all, the Gemara seems to indicate, based on the Kal V'chomer, you can extend the Kal V'chomer a little bit more, and extending that Kal V'chomer would lead us to the conclusion that just as a son is a first position inheritor by his father, he should be a first position inheritor by his mother. To which the Gemara says, my timer, dayo lavo minadin lios kinidon. Dayo. So we'll say, what does dayo say? What does dayo say? Dayo says, remember again, what is a kal v'chomer? A kal v'chomer means ultimately, again, you go ahead and you're learning out A from B or B from A. So what Dayo says is there is a limit. In other words, essentially Dayo says like this: the derivative halacha can never be more chomer than the source halacha. That's what Dayo says. So what does it mean by Dayo over here? My time at Dayo lava minadin lios kinidon. Ultimately, again, we'll say that Dayo would say that halacha l'maisa, the derivative can never be any stronger than the source. What does this mean? So Rabbi says, so remember, take a look at the Rashbam for just a moment. The Rashbam says, no Rashbam here. Okay, fine. So I see the idea over here is, remember, so what's the source? What's the source for inheriting the mother? Or who's the source for inheriting the mother? The daughter. So because the daughter is the source, right? She's the source. Therefore, halacha l'maisa, the son, who is the derivative law, cannot become any stronger than the source, right? The daughter is the source for the concept that a child inherits a mother. Then we're going to learn out from a kal v'chomer that if the daughter can, certainly the son can. But to then put the son as a first priority inheritor over the daughter would make the derivative halacha even stronger than the source halacha. And Dayo says, you can't do that. Dayo says you can't do that. Fine. So the Gemara says, 1 second. The Tanakama lo darash Dayo. So we're saying, now remember, the Tanakama was the one who floated the idea that a son should be a first position inheritor by the mother also. So does that mean that the Tanakama doesn't hold of the concept of Dayo? But after all, the Gemara says, V'dayo da'oraisahu. The concept of Dayo, Rabbi say, is da'oraisa. Is Doraisa. Now what does that mean? What do you mean Dayo is Doraisa? Listen to this, the Sanya. So I said it's incredible. The Sanya, Midin Kal V'chomer Kesad. Where in the Torah do we find an example of a Kal V'chomer? So listen to this. Where do we find it? Vayomer Shel Moshe, Va'avia Yarok Yarak Befaneha, Haloti Kalim Shivas Yamim. Kal V'chomer L'Shchina Arbasa. So remember again, this is in the episode after Miriam speaks negatively about Moshe Rabbeinu. So she is stricken with saras. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu is discussing with Moshe the duration of her punishment. So Hashem says to Moshe, if her father would have spit in her face. In other words, if she would have been disgraced by her father, she would have been excommunicated for 7 days. So now, based on that, you would say, "Sa'alachas kama v'kama," that she impugned the dignity of Moshe, which by extension is impugning the dignity of the Shekhinah. She should be excommunicated for how long? 14 days. 14 days, that's the Kal V'chomer, right? If she would have been dishonored by her father, it would have been 7 days. Now that ultimately, again, this is against the Shechina, it should be for 14 days. And yet what happened? But Rabbi said, what do you see over here? But the Kal V'chomer is capped, right? The derivative, which in this case is the crime against the Shechina, is capped ultimately again by the duration of the crime against the father. So therefore, again, even though it's a Kal V'chomer, it's capped at 7 days. So from here you see that dayo is a biblical. So first of all, Kal V'chomer is a biblical concept, which we know because Kal V'chomer is one of the Yud Gimel Midos. It's not one of the Yud Gimel Midos. It's one of the exegetical principles. Thank you. They're hermeneutical exegetical principles, right? Yes. So the Maisa again. So you see over here that Kal V'chomer is deraisa, we know. Interestingly enough, dayo is a biblical concept as well. So if that's the case, everybody has to hold of dayo. So now let's circle back. So if that's the case, now remember, so I learned out from the pasuk that a girl inherits her mother. Now based on the Kal V'chomer, I learned that a son also inherits his mother. Now therefore, but dayo should kick in, and dayo should say yes, but a son inherits equally with his mother, a son inherits his mother equally with a daughter, and does not go ahead and jump in front of her. So how could the Tana Kama suggest that a son would be a first position inheritor even by his mother? To which the Gemara says, "Be'alma darash dayo." You're right. In general, the Tana Kama of course holds of dayo. Everybody holds of dayo. V'shayni hacha da'amakra mimatos. But say here's the difference. The difference over here is the pasuk says mimatos, makish mata ha'im lemata ha'av. So this is very interesting. So Rabbi said in the pasuk where all of this is starting, right? Remember again, where does all of this begin? All of this begins with the pasuk v'chalbas yoreshes nachala mimatos b'nei Yisrael. That's what the Torah is teaching us, that just as the daughter has the ability to go ahead and inherit her father, she has the ability to inherit her mother. So what do you see over here in this pasuk? The Torah is equating inheritance from the mother with inheritance from the father. They are the same. And therefore I would be tempted to say, Ma mata ha'av ben kodem labas, af mata ha'im ben kodem labas. That just as when it comes to inheritance from the father, the son precedes the daughter, so too when it comes to inheritance from the mother, the son precedes the daughter. So therefore I will say, okay, here's the good news. What's the good news? We have successfully established the concept that a son inherits his mother, right? That's what we set out to do, so mission accomplished, right? We learned that from a very interesting source. We both say it's also just so fascinating that a lot of these inheritance laws that we know intuitively, it's fascinating to see that there's no explicit pasuk for them, right? And they're learned out in these very interesting roundabout ways. So now I know, now I have the source, the fact that a son inherits his mother. Interestingly enough, the source is really a Kal V'chomer that a daughter inherits her mother. So now that a daughter inherits her mother, Kal V'chomer that a son inherits her mother. So I will say, so now what's our raging machlokes? Now raging machlokes is between the Tana Kama and Rabbi Zechariah ben Akatzav. What's that machlokes? Does a son inherit? Are they equal inheritors, son and daughter of the mother? Or does a son still have precedence over a daughter in inheritance of the mother as well? Tana Kama holds that the inheritance from the mother is like inheritance from the father. And just like a son has precedence by a father, so too a son has precedence by a mother. Rabbi Zechariah ben Akatzav, they inherit equally. They inherit equally by a mother, even though a son has precedence by a father. So now that's going to be a machlokes. Here we go. Rav Nitai wanted to pass like Rabbi Zechariah ben Akatzav, namely that when it comes to inheritance from the mother, son and daughter are equal. They are equal inheritors. So Amalei Shmuel, Kiman. So Shmuel heard what Rav Nitai was doing. So Shmuel said, "Who are you paskening like?" And he answered, "Zechariah." Right? And ultimately, Rav Nitai answered Zechariah. To which Shmuel responded, "Efes Zechariah." Okay, now let's say that this requires a little bit of translation explanation over here. Right? Efes Zechariah means literally again, not that Zechariah is a zero, but rather Efes Zechariah kimo ki Efes Kesef. Kilomar batlu dvarav. So no, essentially what Shmuel was saying is that position is rejected. We don't pass like Zechariah ben Akatzav, but rather but rather ultimately, again, we paskin like the Tanakama, that the laws of inheritance are the same for a father and a mother, and a son will have precedence. But I'll just mention, by the way, it's incredible. Zechariah ben Akatzav, right? We'll say, what's a Katzav? What's a Katzav? Katzav is a butcher. Katzav is a butcher. So say you wonder to yourself, Zechariah ben Akatzav, like what's the, give me his father's name. So I'll say, so there's a tremendous Musar Haskell. Tremendous Musar Haskell in life is, it doesn't matter as much where you come from. What matters much more in life is where you're going. While it's very beautiful to have yichus, right? And while it's very beautiful, ultimately, again, to go ahead and have a beautiful pedigree, and to come from Talmidei Chachamim and great Geonim and Tzaddikim, that's nice. Zchus Avos is absolutely something beautiful. And by the way, we all have Zchus Avos, Elokei Avram, Elokei Yitzchak, Elokei Yaakov. We all have a wonderful pedigree. But I will say, but at the end of the day, that's nice. That's nice. But what matters much more is what you make of yourself. Unless you think, if you come from humble beginnings, I am stunted in my ability to personally self-actualize, it is fundamentally and unequivocally untrue. Rabbi Zechariah ben Akatzav. Whoever your father is, right? Big Talmid Chacham, not a big Talmid Chacham, not from this, that doesn't make a difference. At the end of the day, what matters in life is not where you came from, but where you're going. What matters in life is what you choose to make of yourself. And I will say, this is a more general motif that we embrace wholeheartedly in Yiddishkeit. It's not just your father who you don't choose. It's many circumstances in life that you don't choose. But at the end of the day, even though you don't choose many things, you choose you. You choose what you want to be. You choose who you want to be. You choose the life you want to lead. You choose what you want to do with your circumstances. And I both say, what a refreshing lesson as we enter into the new year as well. Again, we spend so much time lamenting all of the sunk costs of life. We spend so much time lamenting all of the things we cannot change instead of focusing our energies on all of the things we can. I can't change my family, I can't change my circumstances, I can't change a lot of realities, but I absolutely have the power to shape who and what I want to become. Incredible. So Rabbi Tavlo, Avid of Rabbi Zechariah ben Akatzav. So Rabbi Tavlo wanted to go ahead and conduct himself like Rabbi Zechariah ben Akatzav. Amalei Rav Nachman, Maihi. So Rav Nachman said, what are you doing? So again, I will say, we're going to see a number of these stories. So Rav Nachman said, what are you doing? Amalei Rav Chinna bar Shamia, Mishmei Rav, Halach Rabbi Zechariah ben Akatzav. Halach Hazak Rabbi Zechariah ben Akatzav. Namely, that son and daughter inherit equally when it comes to inheritance from the mother. Amalei Zil Ahaderbach. You better reverse that decision. Ve'ilo mafkinalach Rav Chinna bar Shamia me'unyach. Or if not, I'm going to take out Rav Chinna bar Shamia from your ears, which apparently is an expression of excommunication, right? Again, there's so much flowery lashon in Aramaic that does not translate well into English, right? I'm going to remove him from your ears. If you take a look at the Rashbam, the Rashbam says over here. Mafkinalach, mishamtinalacha, I'm going to excommunicate you. For lo yisaylecha Rab Chinna bar Shamia. In other words, the lashon over here is I'm removing him from his ear. I mean, I'm going to excommunicate you, and he's going to be unable to help you. Okay, which is another way of saying we do not hold like Rabbi Zechariah ben Akatzav. Fine. Rav Huna bar Chia, several of them are of Rabbi Zechariah. Rav Huna bar Chia wanted to also paskin like Rabbi Zechariah ben Akatzav. Okay, I'll say, so once again, so remember, good news, what's the good news? We have accomplished our stated goal, which is, we wanted to prove that a son inherits from his mother. Mission accomplished. Now that opened the door, though, to another issue, which is what is the lineup for inheritance from a mother? Do son and daughter inherit equally? That's Rabbi Zechariah ben Akatzav. Or no, does a son inherit before the mother? That's the Tanakama. So now that's our ongoing machlokes. Rav Huna bar Chia, several of the Rabbi Zechariah ben Akatzav. Rav Huna bar Chia wanted to paskin like Rabbi Zechariah ben Akatzav. Amalei Rav Nachman, my hi. So Rav Nachman said, what are you doing? Amalei, the Amar Rav Huna, Amar Rav, halacha Rabbi Zechariah ben Akatzav. Rav Huna quoted in the name of Rav. So I'll say, so remember again, the main character in the story over here is Rav Huna bar Chia. So two different people. So Rav Huna bar Chia wants to paskin like Rabbi Zechariah ben Akatzav. Rav Nachman says to him, what, bless you, what are you doing? Rav Huna bar Chia said, Rav Huna paskin in the name of Rav that we hold the Rabbi Zechariah ben Akatzav. So the Gemara says, Amar lei, eshlach lei. So Rav Nachman says, oh yeah, let's send a messenger to see if Rav Huna really holds like that. I don't believe it. Let's see if he holds like that. Ichsif, Rav Huna bar Chia became embarrassed. Now, why did he become embarrassed? Take a look at the Rashbam. So the Rashbam is about 3 lines up from before it gets very wide on the bottom. Echsif t'shema chazarbo Rav Huna olo hayasomich b'shmuaso. So Rav Huna bar Chia was embarrassed for one of 2 reasons. Either A, because he was concerned maybe Rav Huna retracted, or maybe, now that he's thinking about it, maybe he didn't really hear correctly. Maybe he wasn't sure. Amarle, so Rabbi says, now listen to this. So the fact that Rav Huna bar Chia became embarrassed, this actually made things worse. Because Rav Nachman said, Amarle, hashta, kinach nafshe di Rav Huna, isrisis lekable. So Rav Nachman says back to Rav Huna bar Chia, if Rav Huna was dead, so you wouldn't be embarrassed, because there'd be no one to contradict what you said. But now that Rav Huna is alive, now you're embarrassed, because maybe you're going to be proven wrong. So we'll say, so it's interesting what's happening over here. In other words, Rav Nachman was trying to teach Rav Huna bar Chia a lesson, which is, in life, don't say something unless you are absolutely unequivocally sure that it's correct and you're ready to stand behind it. The fact that Rav Huna bar Chia became embarrassed when Rav Nachman said, I'm going to check up on what you said, indicated that Rav Huna bar Chia was unsure. And Rav Nachman took him to task for that. So don't espouse a halacha. Don't say something. And I was like, can you imagine how different our lives would be if we wouldn't say stuff unless we were 100% sure that it was correct, right? My gosh, there was a lot more silence in the world. Right? But Lamaisa again, fascinating idea. So I'll say, so by the way, who did Rav Nachman? I will say, obviously, what's fascinating about all of these exchanges, I think what's interesting about all of it, is like the tremendous passion involved in this, right? In other words, the Gemara is filled with machloksim all the time. But you see that whatever is going on over here, this clearly hits a nerve, right? Because again, like we're talking about excommunication, where I'm going to check up on you, all this. So what's going on over here? So the Gemara says, in this particular case, who did Rav Nachman hold? Like, ultimately, again, they said that halacha l'maisa, that the halacha does not follow Rabbi Zechariah ben Akatzav, and therefore, again, even when it comes to inheritance from the mother, halacha l'maisa, a son has precedence over a daughter. Now, just understand, these halachas are incredibly important, because again, especially in Eretz Yisrael, again, these can very dramatically alter just the tribal allocations within Eretz Yisrael as well. Okay, let's go weiter. So the Gemara says as follows. So another interesting story here. Mistamech va'azor Rabbi Yanai akasva de Rabbi Smaloi shamei. So Rabbi Yanai, so the Rashbam points out to there, Rabbi Yanai was older and either was blind or just einav kehos, means he had very poor vision. So either he was blind or his vision dimmed. So therefore again, he was leaning on the shoulder of Rav Smaloi, his attendant. So if you can imagine, right, he's probably holding on to Rav Smaloi's shoulder, or leaning on his shoulder, and he's being led. V'asi Rabbi Huda Nisia la'apayu. Rabbi Huda Nisia, not Rabbi Huda Nasi, different person. Rabbi Huda Nisia is walking opposite them. Amarle, Rav Smaloi sees Rabbi Huda Nisia from a distance, and he says, "Oh, bar inish da'asa lekablina hu yoi v'galuse yoi." The man who is coming opposite us is a very dignified man, and ultimately, again, he's wearing a very dignified cloak. Now, if you look at the Rashbam, first wide line, there's someone very important coming opposite us. He's wearing a very dignified cloak, the cloak of a Talmidei Chachamim. And we'll say, here's what's interesting. So apparently this is fascinating. So Rabbi Smalai noticed 2 things about him. So the cloak, being dignified, okay. But apparently what he also noticed was that Rabbi Huda Nisia held himself in a certain way. He held himself in a dignified fashion. Okay? So what happens? So this is fascinating. So when Rabbi Huda Nisia came closer, so what happens? So Rabbi Yanai, Gashisha. So Rabbi Yanai felt his cloak. He felt the material of Rabbi Yehuda Nesia's cloak. Amrlei din shiura kisak. Essentially, the laws of Tuman Tara for this cloak would be the same laws of Tuman Tara for sackcloth, which was another way of saying it's cheap. It's a cheap cloak. In other words, it might look nice. It's a knockoff, right? It might look nice, but at the end of the day, the material is not good. So Rabbi say, "Boy mine." So he asked of him. If you take a look, fine. Yishir beged of vigarua v'shir lekabel tuma dal tfachon dal kisak. So when it comes to sackcloth, the shear that is mekabel tuma, ultimately again it's 4 tfachim by 4 tfachim. So that was in terms of the Gemara, in terms of Tuman Tara, if you wanted to give someone a shtach about their clothing, you would say, the shear for tuma for that garment is 4 tfachim by 4 tfachim. So it's about that. You can use this on a Shabbos and Yom Tov about someone's suit. You can use this. That suit. That's a 4 tevach by 4 tevach suit. So I say, all right, didn't come out the way I thought it would. Anyway, the Gemara says as follows. So the Maisa, so Rabbi Yanai will say, by the way, what's the pshat? Like, why does the Gemara have to tell us this stuff? This is Rabbi Yehuda Nesia, who was one of the Gedolei Hadar. So I'll say, tremendous yisod also, that sometimes, again, things are not what they seem. As people, whether we like to go ahead and admit it or not, we are very superficial beings, and we are very judgmental beings. People like to say they're not judgmental, they're liars. Everybody is judgmental. We judge people within 5 seconds of meeting them. We look at how they're dressed, we look at how they're groomed, we look at how they speak, we look at how they present, and we have sized them up in literally, again, 30 seconds. And anyone who tells you that they don't do this is mamish lying. It's not true. We do it. It's almost like reflexive. And I will say it's important. HaKadosh Baruch Hu programmed us this way because it allows me to help figure out my interactions. It helps me to frame my interactions with them. How am I going to relate? Who is standing opposite me? So even though we all do it, the yesod to remember is, even though I do it, the yesod to remember is, it may not be correct. That's the ikar takeaway. We do it because almost like you have to do it. You have to do it in order to be able to frame some type of interaction. But just know that how and when you're sizing a person up externally may or may not be correct. What looks grand may in fact be inferior, and what may be inferior may in fact be something really special. So again, you're not going to be able to avoid that almost inherent reflex to judge people based on externalities, but just be open to the fact that your initial judgment may be fundamentally flawed, and then be ready to pivot on that judgment and on that sizing up of that individual. It's important yesod. The Gemara was right there. So he asked of him, how do we know that a son comes before a daughter, even when it comes to mother's inheritance? Matos, because the pasuk that teaches us that a daughter inherits from her mother uses lashon matos, plural. It comes to go ahead and what? It equates the inheritance of the mother from the inheritance of the father. Ben kodim libas, af mata'im ben kodim libas. So to inheritance from the father, son comes before a daughter. So to inheritance from the mother, son comes before a daughter. So we'll say this is the position of Shmuel, the position of the Tanakama, and clearly the position of Rabbi Yanai. Amr lei. So again, Rabbi Yehuda Nesia responded. He said, "Ima mata av b'char not al pi shnayim, av mata ein b'char not al pi shnayim." Aye. So Rabbi Yehuda Nesia said, "Fine. If you're going to make that argument, then you should say that just as when it comes to inheritance from the father, a son gets a double portion. So too when it comes to the inheritance from the mother, a son should get a double portion as well." To which Amr Beis, Amr Lei. So both say, watch this. So remember, that was Rabbi Yehuda Nesia who asked that to Rabbi Yanai. I'm sorry. Oldest son, right, oldest son, correct. Amr Lei l'shamei. So ultimately, against Rabbi Yanai hears this, and Rabbi Yanai says to his attendant, "Good, let's get out of here. Less din savi lemelov. This guy has no intention of learning." Now what's going on over here? So just understand the exchange, right? So Rabbi Yanai goes ahead and says, So they're having an exchange in learning. Then Rabbi Huda Nisia said, so after they've established that Rabbi Yanai holds that Allah Alamaisa again, like the Tanakama, namely that a son inherits, first position inheritor by a mother, just like he is the first position inheritor by his father. So then Rabbi Huda Nisia asks Rabbi Yanai, if that's the case, then just like a son, yes, a firstborn son gets double portion by his father, he should get a double portion by his mother as well. To which Rabbi Yanai did not like that question. And Rabbi Yanai felt this guy is just wasting our time. He just wants to be argumentative. And I will say, we know that in the world of questions, there are two different types of questions. We like to say all questions are good questions. That works great when you're in first grade, right? But afterwards, it's not true. There are some times that people just like to ask because they like to hear themselves talk, right? Or they like to be argumentative just for the sake of being argumentative. So Rabbi Yanai apparently felt that Rabbi Huda Nisia was just asking for the sake of being argumentative. Now, listen, now why did he take such a... So that's why he says, so therefore, Rabbi Yanai turns to Rav Smalai, his attendant, good, let's get out of here. Less din savi lemelef. This guy doesn't want to learn. All he wants to do is to be argumentative and ask questions. Now the Gemara says, whoa, what happened over here? Because Rabbi said the pasuk, when it talks about double portion, says that the son gets a double portion, b'chol asher yimatzei lo, from whatever the father possesses. What do you see from here? Lo v'lo lo. That teaches us that the concept of it's so again, at least from Rabbi Yanai's position, this was a because from Yanai's position, this was a pashut idea. The pasuk says, "Lo." The din of Pishnaim is only from the father, not from the son. Not from the mother. Lo v'lo lo. Ve'ema hani mili bachar shnasa almana. So maybe it's only talking about a case, or I'll say maybe again of a man whose friend is his first marriage, but maybe he's marrying a woman with children from another marriage. Ava bachar. But maybe it's a first marriage for both of them, and therefore again the son in question, right, is the firstborn of this mother as well. Maybe in that case he should get double portion from his mother's estate. When the Torah refers ultimately again to a firstborn for Nachala, it says the first of his strength, the first of the fathers. Oh no, v'lo oh no, the first of the father, not first of the mother. So both sides. This is very important. So Halacha L'maisa, Rabbi Yanai is teaching us that Halacha L'maisa, the din of Pishnaim, of double portion. In other words, just if you trace this progression over here, so we have established that a son does inherit his mother. We still have that machlokes. What's the order of inheritance by a mother? Are son and daughter equal, Rabbi Zechariah ben Akazav, or ultimately again does son come before the daughter, Tanakama? So that machlokes is still out there. And obviously the corollary to that machlokes is, would a son get pishnayim in a bachar, get pishnayim in his mother's estate? It sounds like everyone is agreeing the answer to that is no. There's no pishnayim for a bechar from his mother. Hahomi, so the Gemara says, no, because I need that trash. Hahomi ba'ilei leba'achar nefalim. No, I need reishis, so no. To teaching of us is actually very interesting. That Allah L'maisa, what happens if Reuven's married to Rachel, and Rachel's first pregnancy ends, Rachmana l'tzlan, in a miscarriage. Then she has another boy afterwards. So the halacha is that boy is considered to be the bachar for inheritance purposes. And I will say it's interesting actually in general when a woman has a boy after a miscarriage, is that boy considered to be a bachar? For example, let's say for pidyon haben. So a lot of it depends on which stage in pregnancy the miscarriage occurs. Because let's say for example for pidyon haben, the din is peter rechem, the child that opens the womb. So depending on when the miscarriage occurred, the subsequent child may or may not be a bachar. But interestingly enough, for inheritance law, the first viable boy, in other words, the first viable birth, that's the bachar. That's the bachar. So the Gemara says, why? The Gemara says, Misha libo dava alav. Because who is the Bechar? Who is the Bechar ultimately, again, for inheritance purposes? Only someone for whom the father would mourn. This comes to exclude the miscarriage that the father doesn't mourn for. Now, obviously, again, Rashban points this out. Of course, the parents are going to mourn for a miscarriage. It's not what the Gemara is saying. What it's saying is it's a different kind of mourning. It's a different kind of mourning. When Rahman al-Islan, a child is born viable, and then Rahman al-Islan, the child passes away. There's a much more profound sense of mourning, as opposed to the loss that is felt over a miscarriage, which is of course a loss, but a different kind of loss. Incredible. Imkain lemakra ki hu reishis on. If that's the case, let the pasuk just say ki hu reishis on, because the Bechar is the first of the father's strength. My oh no, shma min tarti. So both say the word oh no. Yoni Frager, happy 41st birthday, mazel tov, mazel tov. The shir was dedicated in your honor by your chaverim. Mazel tov, until 120. Emir Hashem. Yeah, there's no speech. Sit down. There's no speech, right? So it says over here like this. So the Gemara says over here like this. So therefore, again, oh no, ultimately again comes to teach me two halachas. We'll say. Number one, that halacha l'maisa. That it is only the father's first strength that ultimately goes ahead and gets double portion. And number two, ultimately again, even a Bechar who comes after a miscarriage is also going to be a Bechar for Nachala. So the double lashon of oh no, in other words, I should say the extent, could have just said own. The fact that it says oh no, we see this all the time. The Torah writes the word in a long form that allows you to make multiple drashas. So drasha number one is that the din of double portion for a Bechar only comes from a father's inheritance, and number two, a Bechar born after a miscarriage is still called a Bechar for inheritance purposes. Incredible. So vakati ema hani mili amo shenasa basula. Maybe I say it applies ultimately again in the case of a man who was previously married, had a family, who married a basula. Maybe again, if it's the first marriage for both of them, maybe the boy should take a double portion. Ella amarava amarkra lo mishpat habachora. Mishpat habachora liish velo mishpat habachora liisha. So I say no, because once again it says lo mishpat habachora. The mishpat of Bechar only applies to a father, doesn't apply to mother. So therefore, I will say, working backwards, we see that halacha l'maisa that there is no double. The only din of pishnayim is a din ultimately of pishnayim from the father's inheritance. There is no din of pishnayim ultimately again from the mother's inheritance. So we'll say, how do we paskin in the other area? It appears we're going to loop back to it. But it appears again. I'm not giving you this final because I want to do the halacha at the end of the next sugya. But it appears just based on numbers that the halacha follows the Tanakama, not like Reb Zechariah ben Akatzav, namely that although a son takes precedence over a daughter in the inheritance of the father, when it comes to inheritance from the mother, son and daughter are equal. That's what it sounds like ultimately again so far. I'm sorry? Rav Nachman, but again, Rav Nachman held like that. Rav Nachman held like the Tanakama. Rav Nachman held like the Shmuel. It is only Reb Zechariah ben Akatzav who is the one who doesn't hold like that. But I'm saying just by the simple numbers on the daf, Reb Zechariah ben Akatzav is the minority opinion. The majority opinion seems to side with the Tanakama. But again, we'll see the Rambam in just Emir Hashem probably tomorrow at this point. So Gemara goes out, but just keep that in your mind. So Gemara says, "Va'ish es ishto." So next, a man inherits his wife. We don't know that from Tanarabanan. Sheiro. The pasuk says sheiro, right? Uses this lashon of sheiro. Then Rabbi say, now this is ve'im ein achim la'aviv. This is the pasuk we're speaking about by father and son. Who's she'ero? So the Gemara says, zu ishto. That's a wife. That means teaches us that a husband inherits his wife. Beautiful. So the Gemara says, yochol afhi tirshenu. So I might have thought that she would also inherit him. Talmud lomar v'yoresh osa. He inherits her. Hu yoresh osa ve'in he yoreshes oso. Fine. So we'll say, so then it says, so based on the psukim, I have a high cry, lav hachik ksivi. So we'll say, okay, so now here's the problem with this. Let's at least begin this today, because this is actually a fascinating sugya. So we'll say, the pasuk that the Torah is quoting is the following pasuk. This is actually the same pasuk that we started with the father and the son. It says like this, Vim ein achin la'aviv, unisatem es nachalaso, l'sheiro hakarov elav. You will give the inheritance to Sheiro Hakarov Elov. That's the pasuk. Give the inheritance to the closest relative. So the Gemara says, who is a she'er? Who is a she'er? So that refers to a wife. That refers to a wife. So the Gemara says, Melami Shabal Yorish Sishto, Yochel Afhi Tereshenu. So you might have thought that she should inherit it. Tamalomar V'Yorish Osa. He will inherit her. Who Yorish Osa, ve'in he Yoreshes Oso. He inherits her, but he doesn't inherit her. He inherits her, but she doesn't inherit him. Here's the problem. I'll say the Gemara just says something ridiculously amazing, which is the Gemara quoted a pasuk that doesn't exist. The Gemara changed the words of the pasuk. The Gemara says, one second, v'hai kroi lav hachi ksivi. I will say the phrase the Gemara quoted was v'yoresh osa. The problem is that's not what the pasuk says. The pasuk actually says, "Unesatem es nachalaso l'sheira karov elav." L'sheira karov elav. So what's going on over here? So v'akra lavakik sivi. Rabbi taritzachi. Here's how you have to read it. Unesatem es nachalaso l'karov elav sheiro v'yoresh osa. So Abaye says, here's what we're going to do. We're going to splice the pasuk a little bit. Here's how you read it. Read it like this. You should give the inheritance to the closest relative. And when it comes to his wife, you inherit the wife. So the Gemara says, so we'll say, what Abaye just did is Abaye just totally cut out the pasuk. First white line, Amar Rava, Sakina Charifa Mefaska Kroi. Rava says, wow, Abaye, you have a very sharp biblical scalpel. They both say, by the way, I want to tell you, I don't ever remember seeing something like this in the Gemara, where somebody takes a pasuk and literally moves it around. It's like a Hasidic Rebbe, right? In other words, so this is like you don't see this in the Gemara about literally going ahead and taking words and moving them around. So Rabbi says, Abaye, like what are you doing? That's one sharp knife that you have in order to move words around the Gemara. Ela Amar Rava, rather Rava says like this, Hachi Kamar, Unisatem es nachalos sheiro lo. So we'll say, now watch what Rava did. Rava said rather what you could do is like this. We'll say, so the pasuk is, Unisatem es nachaloso l'sheiro hakarov elav. So what Rava does is, Rava says, "Unesatem es nachalas she'ero lo." So what Rava did is Rava took the vav and the lamed, the vav of nachalaso, the lamed of she'ero, took those off because they're a little bit extraneous and made them into a word, which is what? Lo. So Rava reinterprets the phrase to mean unesatem es nachalas she'ero lo. You will give the nachala, the inheritance of his she'er, meaning his wife, lo. Because Rava darshan kasavar, gorin umosifin vidarshin. You could go ahead and remove a letter, add a letter, and darshan. So apparently, according to Rava, this is one of the mechanisms through which you could go ahead and darshan psukim. So we'll say a pretty dramatic drasha. Other Tana brings it from a different location, from a different source. The Sanya, the Yoresh Osa, he will inherit her. Malamed Shabal Yoresh Ishto. That teaches us that a husband inherits his wife. Did Rabbi Kiva? Rabbi Shmuel says, "Eno tzarach." You don't even need that. Hari Omer v'chalbas Yoreshes Nachal mimatos b'nei Yisrael. So what's actually what we're going to do is we're going to stop over here with this Rabbi Shmuel. So both say. So here's the interesting part, right? The good news is everyone is agreeing that halacha l'maisa, a husband inherits his wife. The only shaila is what? The only shaila is what's the mucker for it. So you have Abaye and Rava doing this fantastic, like biblical precision surgery about going ahead and moving words around, moving letters around, moving words around. Again, then you have another school of thought, Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Akiva we just saw. Rabbi Shmuel is going to have a longer drasha Meretz Hashem tomorrow. The good news is everyone agrees on the result, but halacha l'maisa, the process, and Meretz Hashem to be continued to tomorrow. Shkoyach. Mazel tov.
Baby boy. So much cooler. And we don't say